As we continue looking at some of these questions that Jesus asked, and I appreciate even in what we saw tonight, the Father likes to respond with questions, and it's not because he needs information. It's because he's trying to teach us something. And in Mark chapter number 8, we are going to look at another question, really, as we did last Sunday night. This is a series of questions, but we're going to summarize it in one question that he asks in verse number 17. Mark chapter 8. I'm going to begin reading in verse number 13. Follow along as I read. And he left them, and entering into the ship again, departed to the other side. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread. Neither had they in the ship with them more than one loaf. And he charged them, saying, Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of Herod. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, It is because we have no bread. And when Jesus knew it, he said to them, Why reason ye because ye have no bread? Perceive ye not, neither understand? Have ye your heart yet hardened? Having eyes, see ye not? And having ears, hear ye not? And do ye not remember? When I break the 5 loaves among 5,000, how many basketful of fragments took ye up? They say unto him, 12. And when the 7 among 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? And they said, 7. And he said unto them, by the way, there's been a lot of questions. If you look, there's a lot of questions that he's asked here, trying to get him to think, trying to teach him. We're going to summarize it with this last question he asked. How is it that ye do not understand? How is it that you do not understand? Do you know that God has given every one of us a brain, but not everybody uses it? Did you know that? The disciples were guilty of that. I was reading this last week, and I know Curtis could say this, and Peyton could tell us this, but you know that criminals are not the smartest people in the world? They've got brains, but sometimes they don't use them. Police didn't struggle finding Mac Yearwood in Florida back in 2016, who was the Wanted of the Week poster of yourself as your profile pic. And classic, right? This one is pretty epic on the spectrum here. When 2 aspiring criminals attempted to open an ATM machine with a blowtorch, they suddenly understood the big mistake they had made. They successfully melted through the heavy metal frame surrounding the all-important cash and were inches away from success. However, they reached the pile of paper notes that were there and mistakenly set the fire to the entire pile of money, leaving nothing but a criminal record. I thought this one was funny. Officials were left baffled by an Afghan Taliban commander who gave himself up and then tried to claim the $100 reward for his capture. Mohammed Hassan, a mid to low-level Taliban commander, was suspected of organizing attacks on U.S. and Afghan troops in the east of the country. According to reports, he walked up to a police checkpoint in 2012, pointed to a wanted poster featuring his face, and asked for the $100 finder fee. The authorities were at a loss to explain his actions, although one U.S. official reportedly told journalists, clearly this man is an imbecile. So what we see is not everyone that has a brain actually uses it. The story is also told of a woman who was pulled over by the police. The officer kindly asked to see the woman's driver's license. She huffed and said, I wish you guys would get your act together. Just yesterday you took my license and today you want it. There's also a man who went into a pizza place and ordered a small pizza to go. The clerk asked the man if he wanted the pizza cut in 4 slices or 6. The man thought for a moment and said, Just cut it into 4 slices. I don't think I'm hungry enough to eat 6. I hope that doesn't describe you, although as we look at the disciples here tonight, sadly, if we're all honest, we all have moments like that, don't we? God has given us a brain, and yet sometimes we don't use it. We do things or we say things that people kind of shake their heads like, why did they do that? I mean, did they really just say that? You know, as a pastor, I've said that before, like, did they really just say that to me? Were they really thinking about that? And as you study the disciples, as they followed the Lord, there's times where the disciples' behavior, you have to wonder. If we're honest, we have to say this, Lord, are you sure you picked the right people? Did you ever think that? Like, reading through their stories, like, are you sure you picked the right ones? But he did. Obviously, with the exception of Judas, the disciples really became the foundation for the expansion and the success of the church. Even the church that we see today, which eventually tells us they had brains. They did get it, although it took some of them longer than others. But in Mark chapter 8, where we are tonight, there's an incident recorded here that obviously tells us the disciples didn't get it yet. The Lord's trying to teach them an all-important lesson, and it was a spiritual lesson. There were times he would teach different lessons, but this was a spiritual lesson he wanted to get into their heads, but like so many of us, sometimes we got thick heads. And sometimes he says something over and over and over again. But they were too blind to see what was going on. And so, to say kindly, in response to their stupidity, we don't use that word often around our house, but in their response, the Lord hits the disciples with a series of questions. Not because he needs the information, but because he wants to teach them. He doesn't want to leave them where they are. And verse 21 kind of summarizes it when he says, how is it that you don't understand? How do you not get this? How do you not understand? And unfortunately, those disciples, those early disciples there, are often not different than us. Do you know there are still Christians today who just don't get it? We read about what Jesus did, and I believe at times Jesus would say to us, how is it that you don't understand? I mean, you've heard this preached, and you've read this in my word, and you've seen what I've done in the past, but by examining the disciples, you'll see that we're challenged to think the same way that they are. We don't often think carefully. We don't often think about what we say, and we just often say it. Peter got himself in trouble by doing that many times. So I want to see three things tonight that really the disciples were focused on, where their concern was, and Jesus is asking them these questions because he wants to get them away from that. And I believe he wants to do that for us tonight. Number one, I want you to see that in Mark chapter 8, these disciples were concerned with the simple things in life. It was just the simple. And it's really a snapshot here in Mark 8 of a typical day in the life of the disciples. They were usually very busy days, but the chapter opens. And if you look at verse number 1, Jesus is feeding the multitude here. He's going to feed around 4,000 people with only 7 loaves of bread and a few small fish. He's done that. But now he's going to do this with 4,000. And on the heels of this event, if you continue on, the Pharisees are going to confront him. And he faced that often. They're going to confront him. They're going to ask him questions to try to trap him. And they're going to challenge him to show some sort of a sign. Because what you've already done isn't sufficient. Show us something better than that. As the day is come to a close here, the Lord and his disciples are going to board a boat headed to the next location, the next group of people that he's going to minister to. Surely you'd think that when the disciples get on the boat, they're going to talk about all the things that they've heard that day. I mean, the things that Jesus taught, the amazing miracle that he's done, how he so amazingly just speaks to the Pharisees. That is what they're going to talk about, but obviously that was not what they were concerned with. They weren't talking about the master's work. They weren't talking about the miracle that had happened. Instead of celebrating a wonderful day of what the Lord had done, instead of praising the Lord, did you see what their concern was? Look with me. Verse number 15. And he charged them, saying, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And here's what they're talking about. Here's their discussion. And they reason among themselves, saying, it is because we have no bread. Really? Have you ever thought about that? If you've read Mark 8, you've had to think like, why are you guys even talking about this? Why are you even concerned about this? But the simple concerns of the disciples so easily remind us of how often we do the very same thing. We're so often focused on the wrong things, those things that really in light of eternity don't matter. We often get bent out of shape about things that in the scheme of eternity, they really are not going to matter. And sometimes we lose sleep over them. Sometimes we get upset at what something is said to us. So notice a couple things about the concerns that they have. They're very narrow-minded in their concerns. First of all, the Lord has done great things. They've seen this. They've seen him heal the sick. They have seen the dead religion of the Jews exposed before their very eyes, and Jesus confronts that. But all the disciples seem to care about is food. Bread. you know how often your stomach will control? That's why don't ever go to the grocery store if you're hungry. You will buy stuff that you should not. You know how I know? I've been there. My wife knows better than to send me to Sam's Club when they're sampling, because I might just get one of every sample that I try. I mean, that's good. We like that. And then if I'm hungry, it's going to be even worse. But think about this. The present situation they find themselves in, the world around them is dying. The world needs Christ. And all they seem to care about is, what about our bread? What about food for us? Do you know today this often happens? We've got a lost and dying world around us, and everybody is so concerned about, well, nobody did this for me, or nobody recognized this about me, or nobody took attention to that with me. And we get upset about some little things. Well, you know, I went to church, but it was a little too hot in there for me. And another person, well, I went to church, it was a little too cold in there for me, and the seats weren't very comfortable, and the seats were a little too comfortable. I just had a hard time staying awake. I mean, it's just like, you can't make everybody happy. And if you're trying to, you're not going to succeed. That's kind of what the disciples, it's their attitude. Are you really going to be concerned about bread, about a loaf of bread? And so Jesus says in verse number 18, having eyes, see ye not, and having ears, hear ye not, and do ye not remember? I mean, we're not asking you to go back 6 months, not 6 years. How about just 6 hours ago? Can you not remember what just took place earlier today? The same morning, these 12 men had witnessed Jesus miraculously feed 4,000 people with 7 loaves and a few fish. They had witnessed it with their very eyes. And now they're on the boat. And you know what their discussion is? Well, we've only got 1 loaf of bread. Is this going to be enough for all of us? Like, really, guys, are you saying this? Are you so thick-headed that you don't get it? But before we criticize, don't we often do this? Get bent out of shape about the simple things, the little things, and because of that, we get sidetracked. We fret over things, and not only were they concerned about the simple here, and they're very narrow-minded, but it was needless for them to worry about this. You know, Jesus was going to take care of him. He wasn't going to let him go hungry. But today we worry about things like this. We fret about bills and our car breaking down and the house. And, you know, in our mind, those are largely big things. Could I say, in scheme of eternity, they're very small. They're very small. The disciples are worrying about bread. Why? Because they were concerned with the simple. But there's a second thing. Not only were they concerned with the simple, they were clueless in the spiritual. This day's winding down. As the boat starts across the water, the Lord is really thinking about the confrontation he has just had with the Pharisees. We know that because he brings up some of that. The disciples, on the other hand, they have gone away from that. That's back in this box over here. That's done. That's in another location. And they began getting busy about arguing with each other. Hey, who forgot to bring the bread? Don't you know we're hungry? I mean, it's time to eat here. Who forgot the bread? And because there's only 1 loaf, I get first dibs. That's mine. Or the guy who says, I brought it. I get it. And I don't know how long this went on, but I can just picture the scene. You know why? I've heard a lot of it. You know how? I got kids. I was a kid. Well, he did it, or she didn't do it, or they did it. The disciples, just like a bunch of kids here arguing. And suddenly the master from the back of the boat, who is really thinking about things that are more important, confronts the disciples. And he speaks in verse number 15. And he says, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of Herod. Why? Why does he speak up? Well, there's a spiritual truth he wants them to get. Verse 16. After he says this, did they stop? Oh, Jesus, we're sorry. Hey, tell us what you need us to know. No? And they reasoned among themselves, saying, it is because we have no bread. Hey, excuses, excuses. We hear them every day. Jesus is like, hey guys, listen, beware, you're getting distracted. I got a spiritual truth. Well, Jesus, here's the reason. It's because we have no bread. That's why we're arguing. You know what Jesus would say? I don't care why you're arguing. It's no reason to argue. But they had no clue. They were clueless about the spiritual. The disciples misunderstood the Lord's statement to them, and it really is a reminder of how clueless we often are. How many times have we heard the truth over and over and over again? I do know of a preacher, got up, preached a sermon on a Sunday, and just preached and preached. People came up to him that Sunday, Pastor, that was a great sermon. He gets up the next Sunday, preaches the exact same sermon. People come up, preaching, that was such a great sermon. After the third Sunday preaching it, someone kind of clued in and said, Pastor, are you aware that you've already preached that sermon twice? He said, yeah, I am. I'm going to keep preaching it till you get it. Wow. How often are we like them? We're clueless about the things that Jesus Christ is trying to teach us. And so we have to go through that trial again. We have to go through that situation again because we haven't gotten it yet. And so they're clueless about that. They're clueless when it comes to his word to them. Jesus makes an important spiritual statement here, and the disciples missed the significance of it. You know why? Because they were concerned about the bread. They missed what the Lord had said. And that's true today. Listen, it's a lesson for us today. How many believers, born again believers that sit in churches week after week after week hearing messages, and can I say honestly, they really have no clue what the Savior's trying to say to them. This morning we look at the area of discipleship and, oh yeah, I want to be disciple. And we walk out the doors of the building and I wonder if we truly know what he means when he says disciple. I want you to be my disciple. Have you counted the cost? His word to them was one that they needed to hear, but it was about his work in them. Notice verse 17. Jesus knew it. He knows them. And he said unto them, why reason ye because ye have no bread? Perceive ye not yet, neither understand? Have ye your heart yet hardened? He says, listen, I want to do a work in you. I'm trying to teach you something. That's why I'm asking you these questions. It's not because I need you to answer. It's not because I need the information. I'm trying to do a work in you. You know what he was trying to develop? Disciples who were intelligent. They used the brains that God gave to them. They were going to need those. But also very cautious because they were about to, when he goes away, they're about to embark on a journey where there is an entire world that's against them. And they need to be prepared to minister in a culture that was very corrupt and in a culture that was totally opposed to them. Do you know that today we have a culture that's opposed to us? They hate us. And if we don't know what God's word says, and if we don't live what God's word says, we're going to be caught in trouble like they were. The disciples thought he was giving a lesson about buying the right kind of bread. Oh, that's not what he was teaching. He was trying to do a work in their lives. This week, if God tarries, every day God desires to do a work in your life. I thought that was excellent what these two young ladies did tonight. But could I encourage us after seeing that? Don't be clueless about the work that God's doing in your life. As he chisels away, he's doing it for a reason. He doesn't want it there. He doesn't like it there. And he's not doing it because he dislikes you. He's doing it because he loves you. And so he's going to continue to chisel. And too often our mindset has to do with the things that we enjoy. And many of us are clueless to what he wants. And I can say this. He's really not concerned about who wins March Madness or the next World Series or the next Super Bowl. But there's people that can give a lot of facts about those things, but can't give you many facts about this book right here. That would have described them. They were unaware of the spiritual truth that he's trying to teach them. And then I want you to see a third thing. We'll be through. I believe, thirdly, they were callous to the supernatural. Did they not realize who was in the boat with them? It's almost I hate to say it, but it's almost comical. It's astounding, and the whole scene. Twice in recent days, he said 5,000 or more, or 4,000 and more. They've watched him take a few loaves and some fish and feed multitudes. Some estimate 10,000 in 2 events, 10,000 people. They've seen that. And they've taken bread home. There's been enough left over. They've seen him work miracles in the past, but they're calloused to the miracle that he's trying to work in them right there in that boat. They're calloused to it. Could you say you've seen God do miraculous things in your life? Can you see answers to prayer that he's had? Though they had seen this, they were callous to the miracle that he could perform. The Bible is filled with miraculous stories of what God has done. There's things that we read about. I hope you've seen him work miracles in your life. Yet today, in spite of what we know about him, you know what? We don't expect the supernatural. We want it to all work out. And there's a couple things we can draw from these disciples in their callousness towards the supernatural working. Number one, I want you to see in verse number 18, in their question the Lord asks, they saw no potential for a miraculous event to take place on that boat. Even though they'd already seen it that day, they saw no potential for that to happen. Verse number 18, we've already read it. Having eyes, see ye not. Having ears, hear ye not. And do ye not remember. In the next couple verses, he's going to remind them of what had happened the last 2 times. They were in a situation where there was not enough food. Don't you remember? He brought the lad, and there he was, and I took those loaves and fish and multiplied them, and everybody ate, and there was leftovers. Don't you remember that this morning as we were there, and there were 4,000 and more that needed food, and I miraculously did that? They'd seen the miraculous occur, but you know what? They never thought it could happen in that boat that night. Listen, we've read about it happening, and sadly today we just think, that happened in Bible days. Or that happened to, those revivals that took place in our country and around the world. That's in the past. No, God still wants to do that today. He's not changed. But none of them even consider the possibility of a miracle. None of them even say, hey, Jesus, can you do anything with 1 loaf we got here in the boat? Can I do anything with 1 loaf here in the boat? They'd seen that happen. They knew that God could do that. But let me ask you this question tonight. When's the last time you gave God an opportunity to do that in your life? We know he can do it. But when's the last time you gave him the opportunity to do it? When's the last time you quit counting the bread? 1 loaf for you and 1 for you and a piece for you, and said, Lord, could you just take it and multiply it for me? Can you just take this loaf and just do the miraculous? That's the potential that he had. But here's what's even more astounding, and we'll close with this. They saw no potential for the miraculous, but they saw no miraculous person even in the boat. You may say, Jesus was in the boat. They didn't recognize that. Even when Jesus interrupts this great bread debate. I thought about the title tonight, The Great Bread Debate. He even interrupts. He interrupts the conversation like, guys, come on, let's go. I created your brains. Let's use them. Why are we even discussing this? None of the disciples, none of them even stop and ask the Lord to intervene in their situation. Lord, we have to apologize to you. We only brought 1 loaf in the boat with us. I mean, that was a mistake. We should have brought enough for everybody, but we didn't. Think about that. You know who's in the boat. I know who's in the boat. This was no ordinary person. This is the Son of God. The one who spoke the worlds into existence. He had the power to multiply 1 piece of that bread or to create 12 new loaves. I mean, he could have done anything just out of thin air, like, woo, bread starts. You don't believe he can do that? That's what he did in the wilderness. Bread just starts coming down. That's who's in the boat. I put it this way, 12 dinner rolls was no problem for the Lord in that boat. Hey, could we get a refill? You ever been to Texas Roadhouse and they're rolls and never asked for a refill? There's something wrong with you, okay? Like, bring them on. We try to see how many as a family we can polish off. They bring one basket at a time. I'm like, no, bring 4 baskets at a time. Well, that'll be better for us. But nobody asks him. Nobody expects anything. And then look at the last 2 verses. And he says, and when the 7 among 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took you up? Guys, listen. This morning, how many did we take up? They said 12. Oh, excuse me, they said 7, 12 in verse number 19. And he said unto them, here it is. How come you don't get it? How come you don't understand? Why are you so clueless? You know why? Because they're more concerned with the simple. They're spiritually calloused. It's like they know it in their head, but to put it into practice, and they miss out on the supernatural simply because of what they're concerned about. So here's the question for us tonight in closing. What are you worried about? Well, I'll tell you this week, boy, there's some big tests that I got to go through. Is that too big for God? There's this procedure I've got, or there's this bill that's due, or this is happening in my family. I believe he would say to us, how is it that you don't understand who I am? Have you read this? Have you read my love letter to you? I'm concerned for you. Why are you so worried about the bread? Or maybe to the disciples, as he says to them, why aren't you more concerned about spiritual things? By the way, he can provide the bread and the food. But most importantly, he wants us to be tuned into the spiritual. It's sad because we read this about the disciples, but if we're honest, I think we'd have to say, yeah, been there. Guilty, done that. Face something this week and start worrying about it and start fretting about it and either get bent out of shape. Well, nobody noticed that I did that. And Jesus says, do you not get it? That's not what's most important. And I believe it goes along with what we saw tonight. I believe it goes along with what we talked about in the area of discipleship this morning. God cares about his children. And he'll take care of us. But he wants us to be concerned with the things he's concerned with. Not what we think are important, what he says to be important. I've said this often. I don't want God to bless what Faith Baptist Church is doing. I want to be a part of what God's blessing. Easy to say, God, bless what we're doing here. No. I want to be a part of what God's blessing. Lord, if you're in that, I want to be in that. I want to be all in that. And so maybe there's an area that you don't understand. By the way, he wasn't asking them to explain or understand some difficult thing. He just wanted to get the spiritual. Get your eyes off the temporal. Get your eyes to see the miraculous. I don't know what kind of miracle you want God to do, but I'll say this, he wants to still do miraculous things. So what opportunity are you going to give him this week? Lord, if you can do that, I'd like to see you do that. This is a practical way. One reason, every couple years we do that, do the reverse tithe Sunday. You know, it really is just another opportunity for God to prove how miraculously he can do things. I mean, it's amazing. Because we say it all the time. Everything I own and everything I have is God's. Is it really? Prove that to him. Prove it to him. Lord, I'm going to test you. I'm going to try you. I want to see you do something miraculous. I think God says, count me in. I'm ready. I've just been waiting for you. And that could be in medical health things. It can be in financial things. But most importantly, he wants it to be in spiritual things. Let me show you something this week about me that you thought you knew, but you really didn't know. I want God to do that. And so let's ask God for spiritual understanding. Let's ask God that we see the miraculous. And let's ask God that we get beyond just the simple. Talking about the simple. I think God wants to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we could ever ask or think. Father, would you help us tonight to be a people that is concerned with what concerns you? The disciples, much like us, are worried about bread when they've just watched a miracle happen. And they didn't see that would happen to them. And I think we miss out on so many opportunities. I think you could have an opportunity waiting for someone this week to give the wonderful news of the gospel. The gospel is miraculous, changes lives. And you could have in store for us to be a part of the miraculous this week and seeing a life passed from death to life just because of a testimony or a witness. But we might miss out because we're too concerned with the things in this life, too concerned with what's comfortable for us, to miss out on some amazing supernatural things. Lord, I know there's in our lives there's things that we face. There's finances that we have, and there's family things that we face. And yet, Lord, I pray that we'd realize, not just say you're in control, but we truly believe that you're in control and you're working all things for our good and for your glory. Lord, thank you for even the challenge tonight that Esperanza and Esther just shared with us. And I do believe you want to do that chiseling away at things in my life this week. Areas of pride, areas of self-sufficiency, areas of comfort. And Lord, I pray that you would just continue working in us. Help us to be willing for you to allow you to do that. And I pray this week you do supernatural things in us and for us. With heads bowed, eyes closed, could I invite you to stand to your feet tonight?